Today our Bible journaling story comes from Matthew 14:22 through 23, and this is the story of Jesus being in the boat and this big storm coming, and then Peter walking out to Jesus on the water. And so the words that we're going to use actually come from the song Oceans by Hillsong, and it's currently really speaking to me as we go through some of these really confusing times in our journey through COVID-19. And so that's what we're going to focus on today. So get your supplies ready and let's go. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to practice a couple different types of hand lettering. The first you see is a cursive that's going to turn into a fake calligraphy. The emphasis on the downward stroke. So when does your pen go down? You're going to make those lines thicker. So then we have kind of just a really simple basic font. And next is where you kind of mix just a regular print with your cursive. You kind of put those two styles together. The great thing about hand lettering is that it can be as simple or complex as you want to make it. It can be something like fake calligraphy or just a simple, really tall, long, skinny capital letters. Whatever makes your heart happy, that's what you should do. Now we're going to go back and we're going to add those thicker lines on our downward strokes of our cursive letters. By making that thick, it's almost like we took like a really fancy quill pen and did real calligraphy with it. So as Brittany continues to show you different types of hand lettering, we're going to read out of Matthew. So Matthew 14 verse 22 through 33 says, "Immediately he made the disciples, he being Jesus, get into the boat and go before him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up to the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But the boat by this time was a long way from land, beaten by the waves, for the wind was against them." So Jesus had gone away from the people to go pray on the mountaintop alone. And while he was up there, a huge storm came and his disciples were inside of the boat. So imagine that. So you were following Jesus. He tells you to get in this boat and you do what he says, and then this giant storm comes. You were doing exactly what Jesus said, but the storm still comes, right? And so think about the disciples. They were probably terrified. They were scared. And look at verse 25. "And in the fourth watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea." So in the middle of their storm, Jesus comes walking out onto the sea to get to them because he knows they are scared and they are terrified. So look at verse 26. "But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, 'It is a ghost,' and they cried out in fear." So imagine that. You're in the middle of a storm and you see Jesus and it frightens you even more. That's where the disciples are. So we're going to start out our page similar to what we did last week, and we're going to get some water on a plastic paper and we're going to just kind of smush our paints all around like we did for last week's Bible journaling. I'm going to stick with like blues and greens and purples because we're making an ocean scene and I really want it to look like water. So that's the colors that I'm going to go with. So while I'll do that, let's go back to our story. So we're in verse 26 and Jesus is walking out to the disciples. They are scared. They're terrified. This big storm has come. They see him and they get even more scared. Look at verse 27. "But immediately Jesus spoke to them saying, 'Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid.'" So Jesus reaches out to them to reassure them that everything is okay. Verse 28, "And Peter answered him, 'Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water.' He said, 'Come.' So Peter got out of the boat and walked on water and came to Jesus." And when I hear this story, I try to imagine what it was like to be Peter, to step out of that boat onto water, knowing that Jesus was going to catch you no matter what. And that had to have been such an awe-inspiring moment to witness. So back to Bible journaling real quick. You're going to squish that plastic onto your paper, smooth it out, get the color dispersed everywhere you want, and then we're going to sit that aside for a moment. And what you're going to do is you're going to pick out some blues and greens, and you're going to tear them up into really small pieces because that's what we're going to use to make our wave. And now on your journaling paper, you're going to draw the shape of a wave. Just start in one corner, go up, loop it, and come back down. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be exact. and because this is all going to be covered up in papers. In the bottom left-hand corner is the words that Brittany is writing on the wave, and so she's going to start with the words that she wants to write on the wave and work her way up in order to make sure she has enough room. I want you to do this lettering however you see fit. Whatever you think you do the best at, do that style. She's going to do like a fake calligraphy mixed with like basic print, but you do whatever you want to do. Okay, so let's turn back to Peter real quick. So we left off and Peter had stepped out into the ocean to walk towards Jesus. And in verse 30 it says, "But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, 'Lord, save me.' Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying, 'O you of little faith, why did you doubt?' And when they got to the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, 'Truly you are the Son of God.'" I think when we read this section, we give Peter kind of a hard time because we think to ourselves, if Jesus had called me out of the boat, I would have been able to walk with him. I would not have begun sinking. But newsflash, guys, we sink every day. When we get out of bed in the morning and we put our feet on the ground, we are sinking. We are constantly moving away from God because we are just sinful people. But here's the thing. Jesus came so that we would not have to do it on our own, so that we could rely upon him, so that when the storms in our lives come, we can watch him and we can look at him and refuse to be distracted by the wind and the waves. So real quick, I want us to look at verse 31 real fast. So Jesus has called Peter out. Peter has stepped out. He's done decent, and then he starts to doubt and he begins to sink. And then Jesus says to him, he immediately reached out his hand and took him and said to him, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" To Jesus, it was something so simple, but so complex. Why did Peter begin to doubt? Why could Peter not have just kept his eyes on Jesus and continued to walk out toward him in the ocean? And I think that's a really good question. Why do you think we doubt? Why do you think we as Christians who've been promised all of these great, wonderful, perfect things from God, why do you think we continue to doubt? I think an easy answer would be sin and Satan. I think those are all really good, easy answers. But maybe it's just more complex than that. I think a lot of us doubt because we think we can do it better. So Peter is walking towards Jesus and he's hopeful and he's filled with truth and he knows that Jesus will catch him no matter what. But then I think Peter begins to think about what he himself can do. Peter knows that he himself cannot walk on that water. Just like I know I myself cannot dig myself out of this hole of sin that I create for myself. But we as humans constantly try to take it away from God and do everything ourselves. We try to leave God out of it. We think we've made this mess. We've talked about this before in youth. We have this beautiful, beautiful diamond and we take it and we just make it into a pile of dirt. And then we're like ashamed to give it to God. But guess what, guys? God wants us to give him that pile of dirt no matter how bad we feel like we have messed it up. So in the end of 31, when Jesus tells Peter, "Oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt?" I don't think he's getting on to Peter. I think he's just making a statement. He's just saying, Peter, I've got you. All you have to do is believe, right? And that's so hard sometimes because we as humans are sinful and it is so hard to believe in a God that is so good. So let's look at these last two verses. So verse 32 says, "And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, 'Truly you are the Son of God.'" So his disciples in the boat recognize immediately that Jesus is the Son of God. But what happens? We know that when Jesus is put on the cross, they all leave. Peter denies him. This man who just walked out to Christ on the water will deny him the day he is crucified. And I want you to let that sink in because we think to ourselves we could do so much better. But I think in reality, we are Peter a lot of times. We can proclaim Christ when it's easy, but when it gets difficult and hard, we kind of want to step away. But Jesus is always there for us. He will always catch us when we fall into the water. He will always calm our storms. And that is a promise of God. So as we finish up this Bible journaling, what I want you to do is I want you to focus on where you feel like God is calling you, where he is asking you to step out in faith and be Peter in the beginning. Step out and know that Jesus will support you and he will be there for you and he will do whatever he can to help you through the storm that you are in. So don't be afraid to step out in faith and take that plunge into Christ, because no matter what happens, Christ will be there. So now what I want you to do is I want you to get your glue and that paint sheet that we made, and I want you to tear up that paint sheet and use those other little bits of blue paper that you tore up, and you're just going to fill in your wave. It doesn't have to be uniform. It can be messy. Just whatever you do, fill it in all the way with blue, just so that it looks like a big old ocean wave rolling. So let's go back to the idea of stepping out in faith and being people of little faith. So in Mark, there's this story of this man who brings his demon-possessed son to Jesus, and he asks Jesus to heal his son. And Jesus says to him, "How long has this been going on?" And he begins asking questions, and the man just tells Jesus, "Look, I just want my son healed." And Jesus says to him, "All things are possible for those who believe." And the Father responds to Jesus in a really strange way. He says, "I believe, help my unbelief." So how can you believe and not believe in something at the same time? That really stuck with me for a long time when I was young. But the older I've gotten and the more I've gotten to kind of know God personally, I realize how true that statement is. How often do we say and proclaim that we believe in the name of Christ when we go to church camp and we feel this huge high for Jesus, just to come home and it's crushed? That's what this man is saying. He says, "I believe, but there are places in me that have such a hard time, and I need you to fill those." And I think that is what Jesus was trying to get Peter and his men to understand, is that it's not about us believing 100% of the time, all the time. It's about us realizing that we will never be enough on our own, and that we need Christ to come in and intervene in those portions of our life where we need him the most. I think that truth is hard for us at times, but it should also be comforting, because we realize that we don't have to do this on our own. I don't have to be perfect to receive Christ's love. All I have to do is believe. And there are some days where I will believe with my whole heart, and I will be filled with the utmost amount of Jesus possible. And then there will be days where I have more doubts than belief, but guess what? I am still filled with the same amount of Jesus as I was the day before, when I had all of that faith. And that is what Jesus is trying to teach Peter. He's telling Peter, "Peter, you don't do this. You don't walk on this water because of who you are or how good you are. You walk on this water. You get through this storm because of me." And it's the same with us. We don't get through these storms in life by accident. We get through them because Jesus is holding our hand and he is leading us. And we need to recognize those portions of our lives where he needs to come in and he needs to lead more. So what I want you to do is I want you to think about where you feel like Christ is calling you to get out of the boat. Maybe he's asking you to go meet up with some friends. Maybe he's telling you to go to this place and serve him. Maybe he's calling you to the mission field. Maybe he's simply calling you to be a missionary in your own home. And I want you to step out of that boat. Don't give it a second thought. Just step out, because Jesus will be there to hold your hand through that process, and that he will take those portions of you that are of little faith, that where you have that unbelief, and he will fill them with himself, because we are not alone in this. We have God on our side. And the Bible tells us if he is on our side, nothing can be against us. And sometimes things don't look like success to humans, but in God's eyes, whatever we do in his name is successful. And I want you to remember that as we step out of the boat and we walk on these waters that Christ has called us to. Here I'm just taking a pair of scissors and I'm trimming off the excess blue paper that went over the side of my page. And this is my prayer for you. Spirit, lead you where your trust is without borders. Let you walk upon the water wherever you are called. That is what I want for you in your life.